Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Steven with Freeze Peach Gaming, and today, as you can see, I am filming outside. That is because my wife is currently working out where I normally record, and I didn't think you wanted to hear a treadmill while I was trying to do this. Today, I am going over the Ghostbusters Afterlife movie. Now, this isn't going to be a proper review, but more of a critique, because there's a lot of people out there doing reviews, and I want to just focus more on the critique side of things. So I'm going to hop right into it. I do want to give a quick 30,000 foot view of it, because there are going to be some spoilers in this, and I don't want to spoil the film for you. If you are a fan of the original Ghostbusters, I think you should go see it. I enjoyed the movie, but I am going to be critiquing it fairly heavily here, and it's going to sound like my view of it is mostly negative, but I did enjoy it, especially in comparison to modern films. I thought it was pretty good. I thought it was certainly worth the theater experience, despite how expensive it is. Even on a Sunday matinee, it was still like $22 for the wife and I to go. Plus, I bought snacks and stuff, so overall it's like $40. Even with that, I think it was worth a good theater experience where I had some laughs. I enjoyed the action to it. Overall, it was pretty good. But I'd like to hop into the critique. I got some pros and cons here I'm going to go over. I'm going to try and bounce back and forth between the two, but it might lean toward one side or the other at certain points. The first pro, which I don't think should be a pro, and I kind of hate that I have to say this about movies these days, but it's not woke. I got that out of the way. Unfortunately, saying a movie's not woke is kind of like saying, well, at least you didn't give me herpes. As for the con, that's sort of the mirror to that. Afterlife is tonally different from the original, very much so. The original Ghostbusters is a comedy movie first, and it has some horror elements and some action and a little bit of spectacle sprinkled onto it, but the comedy is first and foremost in the original Ghostbusters. This one is more of an action spectacle film with comedy sprinkled on top. And that's kind of what I expected, and I think it was intentionally done that way to match modern sensibilities a little bit better. With that, while we're talking about the comedy, it is decent. There are some decently made jokes. They do some of these similar quick dialogue comedy like they do in the original, if to a lesser effect. The comedy is certainly a lot simpler, and it shows. It's not strong enough to really hold up to the Ghostbusters first one, or even really the second one. I know a lot of people poo-poo the second one. It's not the worst film ever. It's not my favorite film. It's not as good as the first one, but this one, even less comedy than the second one, certainly not as strong. On the pro side, the action was pretty well balanced. One of the things I hate about a lot of modern movies is within the first 15 to 20 minutes, you have to have an action scene. There has to be a fight, something has to blow up, there's action in the first 15 to 20 minutes, and then every 15 to 20 minutes thereafter, there needs to be more action. And I don't like that. I want it to be a bit more balanced, and this one, it was a lot more balanced. There's only really like one major action scene during the second act of the film, and other than that, you kind of have to wait till you get to the climax for some real action. And the climax is basically like two very heavily action scenes mashed between two mild action, more tension building scenes, but overall it was well balanced. The other side of that, though, is that the backstory is terribly underutilized. And I'm taking this point from Critical Drinker. He said it, and it got me thinking. It got the gears turning. And yeah, the backstory into this is horribly underutilized. And I think part of the reason is because it's very derivative of the original Ghostbusters. They even lay it out for you that this is just a rehash of what happened in 1984, except now it's 2021. And in fact, it's so derivative that the bad guy in this is just Gozer. You had an additional layer of threat in the climax of the original one to where Gozer is the real enemy here, but you now have an additional threat with the beast of the apocalypse being, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. They have to deal with that, and then they deal with Gozer. In this one, it's just Gozer. And I felt like it would have been a lot stronger if, I mean, all they had to do was say that the 20 years that Egon had spent out on this farm, that he's done some research and he realized there's a new threat involved, and they introduced that during the climax. That's all they needed to do. It would have added more time to the film. Maybe there were budget constraints stopping them from being able to do that, because this movie did have, when taking inflation into account, half the budget of the 2016 Ghostbusters disaster. On the pros side again, the characters, while being child characters, were actually pretty well set up. McKenna Grace's character, Phoebe, it's pretty well set up that she is socially awkward and scientifically inclined without them having to full-on spoon-feed it to you. It's pretty apparent that Finn Wolfhard's character, Trevor, is an angsty teenager, and I mean, that's not the greatest of character traits to have, but he had some pros to him. He was mechanically inclined, and they actually set that up pretty well in a montage scene to where if you blink it, you miss it, but it was set up that he was mechanically inclined, and that's why he was able to, with a little bit of help from Ghost Grandpa, fix the Ecto-1, and they get rolling from there. On the other side, the con mirror to that is that there were a couple of lines that were very expository and frankly unnecessary, and they kind of stepped on my expectations that had been raised, like, oh, they're not going to spoon feed me this stuff about these characters, and then they just have to straight up outright expose it. The two in particular, both of them are for Phoebe, the main character, essentially. When there's an awkward moment with her mom and her mom's new potential boyfriend, played by Paul Rudd, where, you know, another character is like, oh man, I think our teacher's trying to bone your mom. Doesn't that, you know, gross you out or anything? And she straight up has to say, like, I don't process emotions the same way as other people. But then they couch it with a joke at the end of, you know, but on the inside, I'm vomiting. It was a bit of exposition that then got couched with a joke. The other one that I didn't like was during the climax. The mom is in the car with Phoebe, and she's, you're a, and she just straight up says, like, I'm a scientist, and then pulls the lever and goes out of the car. That felt very forced to me. I felt like they could have actually gone with some of the dialogue comedy there that would have worked out better. They had even set up a good comedy joke that could have gone there with, among our family traits is being a Ghostbuster, not just an asshole. And then she could have pulled the lever and swung out the door, and it would have been a little jab back at her mom. The climax is pretty engaging. I enjoyed the climax. It keeps you involved the whole time. There's a couple of layers to it. You have sort of a chase scene. Well, you have a rushing to the mountain scene, then you have confrontation with Gozer, then you have a chase scene, and then you have the big climax at the end at the farm. It is engaging the entire time. However, like I talked about before, there are certain things that are very surface level, and this is part of the underutilized backstory, is that it's just Gozer. That's the only bad guy. There's no other layers to it. It could have been better. It could have had more to it. It's a bit simple in hindsight. And on top of that, to make things a little bit worse, not for the climax itself, but the falling action or the reprieve right after the climax, basically the movie just ends. There's a very nice nod and a very nice farewell to Harold Ramis and his character of Egon, but it just drops off after that. It's end of movie. There's no, normally in a movie like this, you would have a, 3 months later flash forward to where you get a lot of life going on scenes. The kids are going back to school, maybe they decide to stay and the mom's got a job and they're starting to fix up the farm a bit, and then right before you cut to the ending, you get a slight nod towards something that not everything's back to normal yet, and there's going to be the potential of a sequel in that. It's a very common thing that movies do, but it would have been nice to have a life goes on falling action in that, and not just a handful of nods to the original characters that, honestly, they're not even in the movie that long. They're in there for maybe like 5 minutes. So it feels like a waste of a reprisal or of the falling action, that I'm not getting closure with the characters that I have been growing to know throughout the entire movie. So that's sort of my overall critique of Ghostbusters Afterlife. It is flawed for sure, but like I said at the beginning, I enjoyed Ghostbusters Afterlife. It was definitely worth the theater experience. I went and saw it in IMAX, because, you know, every theater's got a frickin' IMAX these days, and you don't have to drive out to the Air and Space Center to go see it anymore. And I really enjoyed it, and especially since I haven't seen a good movie in theaters since 2017. The last movie that I really enjoyed and thought that it was worth the theater experience was Guardians of the Galaxy 2. And since then, I've seen like 2 Godzilla movies and the Star Wars movies, and each and every one of those was a fucking disappointment. I needed something to bring me back to wanting to go to the theaters, and I think that Afterlife has done that. I'm still gonna be really picky and choosy about it, but I will keep the possibility open. If there's a movie coming out that I think I will like, I might still go to the theaters, because I was ready to write them off. I didn't go see Dune in theaters, like everyone's talking about. Oh, you got to see it in theaters. Like, I don't know. I've got a 65-inch TV and a sound bar with a subwoofer in my living room. Like, do I really need to go see it in theaters and spend 40 frickin' bucks? And, you know, that might actually be part of the reason why I went to go see Ghostbusters Afterlife, because there isn't an option for me to watch it at home. I may have, if it was on, say, like Paramount Plus or something, I may have just sat my ass on the couch and watched it there, rather than driving down to the theater and spending 40 bucks to go see Ghostbusters Afterlife. But I really enjoy the theater experience. I've been a theater goer since I was 6 years old, and I've been a regular theater goer, and I think a lot of that has to do with the early 2000s, and throughout the 2000s, there were a lot of great movies hitting the theater, and there was one within walking distance of my house. So even as a preteen and teenager, I could walk to the theater in like 5 minutes. So I've been missing being able to go to the theater and enjoy the entire experience. Your seat rumbling from the Dolby Digital 5.1, seeing the entire movie on this massive screen, rather than on, a sizable screen I have here at the house, but there's something about being in the theater and being around other people and having the shared experience and walking out, and as you're walking to your car and on the drive home, you're discussing all of your ideas about the movie and parts you liked and parts you didn't like, and any critiques and anything about the movie, about the experience itself. And I really missed that, and this gave that to me. I had a good theater experience, and it's been 4 years since I've had a good theater experience. Pre-COVID was the last, way pre-COVID was the last time I had a good experience, and this at least gave that to me. Either way, that's all I have to say for right now, ladies and gentlemen. Have a wonderful night, and never be afraid to speak your mind.
How do you tell the difference between an oral and rectal thermometer? The taste! Oh, waka waka!